sir, as chair of the International Insolvency Institute, what do you see as the most pressing reform needed globally to make insolvency regimes more effective in cross-border cases?
I think that the most obvious answer that I and other members of the International Insolvency Institute would give is the need for an effective and consistent mechanism through which to handle enterprise group bankruptcies in a cross-border setting. UNCITRAL Working Group 5, in which a great many III members are active, promulgated a model law for this purpose in 2019. That model law draft is under discussion in several key jurisdictions like England and Canada, but so far it really hasn't been adopted anywhere. What we have instead is a patchwork quilt of national laws that really don't fit together well and act as more of an obstacle and a trap for the unwary than a helpful framework. Just as one example, in the U.S., and we consider ourselves to be somewhat of an advanced jurisdiction, you'll have separate cases filed for different members of an enterprise group, a corporate group, and some bankruptcy judges that are particularly focused on the detail will ask on a one-by-one basis what connection each of those companies has with the U.S. in order to be eligible to file in the U.S. If we had a provision for cross-border group insolvencies, then those questions and the risk that you would have a less than complete set of entities eligible to obtain relief under the reorganization laws, that risk would be eliminated. So I think that's the most important thing we need.
So now India has seen nearly a decade of the IBC. So from a global restructuring perspective, where has India outperformed expectations and where does it still lag?
Sure. I think that the framers and the advocates for the IBC would be in a much better position than I am. But from where I sit, I think that the use and acceptance of the IBC have been greater, at least, than I as an observer would have expected, with more than 7,000 cases, according to your Chief Justice, presently pending, and offering a level of stability and predictability that I think is commendable. But two areas that I would point out, two areas that require attention, are in publicizing the use and effectiveness of the IBC so as to encourage direct foreign investment and then also attract additional sources of capital to the country, and then also the need for an individual insolvency regime, which I understand has been lagging a bit behind in the framework and the structure.
Thank you for that answer, sir. That was really insightful. So at this conference, cross-border coordination has been a key theme. Are we moving closer to a truly harmonized global insolvency framework, or is that still aspirational?
I think indeed we are moving closer in some ways, but not in others. The good news that I would take away is that while it's still aspirational, there is the accelerating increase in the adoption of the model law on cross-border insolvency since the COVID era reflects that these aspirations are now more commonly and more widely shared. One greatly underutilized tool that I think needs additional focus is the Judicial Insolvency Network guidelines, JIN, called the JIN guidelines, for court-to-court communications. These are not a model law to be adopted by legislatures in different jurisdictions, but rather a series of procedural rules that are adopted by individual courts in key jurisdictions within the U.S., Delaware, New York, Florida, the Southern District of Texas, also in certain parts of the Netherlands, in the courts of England and Wales, in the courts of Singapore. So a number of courts have adopted these, but I think that they've been underutilized. I personally have been involved in a number of cases that I think would have benefited greatly from invocation of and resort to these Judicial Insolvency Network guidelines and the related modalities to encourage communication between courts. And I've been disappointed that they have not been used and applied more widely. I think that in Singapore, there's a shared belief that is also true. And it would be good to see greater use of the JIN guidelines in cases all over the world, pending in those courts that have adopted them.
Noted. So connected to that, in large multinational restructurings you've led, what is the single most underestimated risk that jurisdictions like India should be mindful of?
Well, it's a bit of an odd thing to say about a law that has as its focus the objective of the debtor-creditor relationship. But I would think that in many larger cases, the problem has been that the focus is much more on debt than it should be. It's been a focus on debt rather than on the systemic and operational issues that created the distress or insolvency for the company in the first place. As Sumant phrased it in his remarks yesterday, India and other nations looking closely at their insolvency laws as well would do well to shift their focus away from creditor recoveries to debtor rehabilitation. Does the system provide safeguards for a reorganized debtor and future creditors who invest in or trade with it, that the plan by which it emerges from bankruptcy is truly feasible, as we phrase it in our Chapter 11 of the Bankruptcy Code, not likely to be followed by the need for further reorganization or liquidation? In the U.S. Chapter 11 scenario, we see too many failed, prepackaged, or pre-negotiated plans that are founded on an unrealistic forward expectation that's adopted in order to effectuate a change of control in favor of certain creditor groups without sufficient attention to the viability of the restructured company. Perhaps the best examples are a large retailer, a large national retailer with over 500 stores in the U.S. that filed a second Chapter 11 case and liquidated only 1 year after emerging from its first Chapter 11 case. Also, one of our airline debtors that went back into Chapter 11 only months after emerging from its first Chapter 11, actually telling the judge at the first court appearance, well, this time we're going to do this like a real Chapter 11. I don't know what's not real about a Chapter 11. But to put it simply, we need more real Chapter 11s so that we have less, as we call them, Chapter 22s, a succession of an 11 followed by an 11. And based on these examples, I think India and other nations looking to reform and modernize their laws and the courts that apply them need to focus more closely on the feasibility of the restructuring plan and the financial viability and stability of the reorganized company. So that would be the first thing that I would single out.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you for taking out the time, and it was a very insightful interview.
Thank you for the time.